We are live. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Chain Chatter. So, if you don't know, we do these every Wednesday at noon Eastern or thereabout, and we have different guests on from the cross-chain space to talk about everything from THORChain to Maya, chain flip, and really just this entire industry and the DEX versus SEX kind of movement that I think all of us have wanted to see. And if you've been in crypto for a long time, then I think you want to see, DEXs gain volume and gain traction. So that's tends to be what this show is about, is just covering all the different things in cross chain. And there's always a lot happening. So today I'm joined by Slambammer, who's obviously made a great name for himself, in the cross chain space on X, talking about THORChain and all of the things. So welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Yeah, cheers. No, thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive in. This is a really interesting time. So while we're recording this, it's April 30th, and obviously on May 5th is the big news is TCY is going to go live. So I think there's a lot going on for THORChain right now, and a lot of things to talk about. So let's start with how you got into crypto. What kind of brought you into the industry? What got you interested in crypto in the first place?
Sure. I mean, for me, it was actually partly boredom. So it was around COVID lockdown times, and I was looking for a hobby to do, and I'd built computers in the past, and I started seeing, that the fact that mining Ethereum was becoming ridiculously profitable, and I just thought, I'll give it a go, build a computer, and see how I went. So yeah, I just started building a few mining rigs, built, 3 or 4, mined Ethereum for a little while until obviously it went to proof of stake. But yeah, I think that's what got me started. And from there, I wanted to learn so much more about it. I was definitely the type of person that when I first started, I would just get a little bit of every coin, right? I wanted to try every chain. I wanted to try. I mean, that was going into DeFi summer, right? So things were just exploding everywhere. So yeah, I just started trying out, as many different areas as I could, and that's how I came across THORChain when it was just coming into its chaos net days.
Yeah. So when you found THORChain, it was in the multi-chain chaos net, I assume. So it was
Yeah.
BEP2. What kind of drew you in first, and what was your first action when you saw it?
I think what drew me in was, for me, it's a very clear value proposition, right? In the sense of, uh, if you've been in crypto for anything longer than a year, you will hear all sorts of snake oil, right? Oh, this crypto is going to be the next thing that's going to help you get a burger fast at a restaurant or whatever, right? And a lot of things sound really obscure, whereas the the idea of saying, okay, I have Bitcoin and I want to swap it to Ethereum. Everyone who's in crypto has done something like that, and the fact that I want to do that on a in a decentralized manner on chain, to me, that's a very, very clear use case. And so it, that was, for me, one of the first projects that I saw in crypto that I just thought, this makes inherent sense to me, and I can see why people would use it. And I started using it, right? So yeah, that's definitely what's drew me in. And from there, I bought a bunch of a few liquidity positions to see how it went. Obviously, THORFi wasn't a thing that back then, and yeah, I just started participating ever since. It just made sense to me.
So is your main kind of long-term vision of Rune and THORChain that it's tackling like becoming decentralized Binance? Is that how you, like, if you were to describe Rune and THORChain to someone like just on the street, say you've got like 5 minutes to describe it, like what are kind of the key things that you would tell them to explain THORChain to them?
Sure. I mean, I think that depends on who I'm trying to explain it to, right? So I also
Absolutely.
interact with a lot of people that are not in crypto space at all, And to them, I would explain it as, I running the crypto wise, right? So, if you have US dollars and you want to exchange them to, I don't know, Canadian pounds, you can use used to be TransferWise, and it's now called Wise. You send them dollars and you get Canadian dollars back. So I just say, we do the crypto version of that. Whereas, in terms of to more crypto native people, yes, certainly I would say, yeah, we're aiming to be the decentralized Binance. I think THORChain's definitely come a long way. I mean, the user experience with things like streaming swaps and stuff like that has become far, far better. But I think, yeah, and ultimately that's the goal, and that's why I'm really excited to see what happens with Rujira. I think it can be difficult because I think people also need to bear in mind a little bit at times what overhead comes with things like decentralization, right? So if I'm a single company and I want to make a change to the way my exchange operates, can do it like that. Whereas in a decentralized manner, there are no really shortcuts, right? You have to bring everyone on board and make get the votes passed. So yeah, I'm full and I'm so excited the direction that we're headed, and and how far we've come as well.
Yeah, what was your what was your experience, and like I said, TCY is kind of on the immediate horizon. So what was your experience, as we moved from multi-chain chaos net to, being live, and then obviously we had things like streaming swaps that came out, and then THORFi came out, and I obviously have been in it since, the multi-chain chaos net days as well.
Mhm.
But I remember when THORFi went live, we were all, super excited, or at least I think most people were. I did see some people who warned about what ended up happening with the
Yeah.
benefit of hindsight. But what was your experience of THORFi coming out, and were you excited about it? And if you were, what made you excited, and how was your initial experience?
Yeah, certainly. So I mean, as I said, I also had savers positions live. Looking at my experience across the time since THORChain went live, I've had several liquidity positions, for example, and I think those mixed bags. Some were ridiculously profitable. I mean, I'll just say, for example, RUNE outperformed Litecoin um, really well, and I had a single-sided Litecoin position in, and so I just 3x'd my Litecoin just from providing liquidity, right? So there was positions like that. But if you ever did a dual-sided liquidity position, it was a quite a tricky thing to manage, right? And I think when THORFi was initially launched, the narrative was when these um, when these savers positions were opened, they would buy RUNE, right? When these lending positions were opened, they would burn RUNE. And that was meant to be narrative at the time, was the liquid black hole, right? It's meant to suck in all of this capital, raise the price of RUNE, and would be in a virtuous cycle. Unfortunately, as we know, and as you alluded to, that wasn't the case, and things started to the RUNE began as RUNE underperformed Bitcoin. Yeah, the positions liquidity providers were in serious pain from that. And yeah, I think from my perspective, I'd always been around the edges of THORChain. I'd been in the Discord here and there, but a lot more silent than I am now. And then when THORFi, when the pause happened at the end of January, and then the restructuring was taking place, early February, I I became a lot more vocal because I wanted to ensure, in a few of those the first proposals that were put forward, they pretty much wrote off uh, dual liquidity providers, which um, I didn't quite think was fair. I will say that I do. I don't know if you recall, but I think it was around 2022 where there was a hack that happened on THORChain, right? And a bunch
Yep.
of funds were stolen. And I remember
And
at
there were
that
actually
time,
like two back-to-back hacks, right?
yeah, yeah,
Related to
yeah,
Ethereum.
exactly, right. There was there was, there was some funds that were stolen, they thought it was fixed, and then yeah, it happened again, and RUNE price plummeted at that point. And I remember at that time the treasury underwrote all the losses, and they said, hey, we care about this, we're in this for the long haul, and we want to protect our ecosystem. And so I think at its core, that was a truly impressive thing to do. I mean, again, if you've been in the crypto space for a few years, you've seen so many projects rug, so many projects make all of these promises. When they hit a hurdle, everyone bails. And THORChain didn't do that then, and I was committed that THORChain wouldn't do that, with regards to THORFi. And thank heavens for Alex. He put together a great proposal, and he was a really unifying figure across Q1. And yeah, I think he's pulled off something exceptional in terms of his leadership and the way he steered us through that. And so yeah, but in all of that, I decided, you know, I I talked about dabbling in all areas of crypto. I'm now quite narrowed, where I obviously hold other coins, but all of it is in THORChain and liquidity positions in savers or what have you. And so I thought, look, I'm gonna live or die in my crypto life by THORChain. So I might as well, step up and play a more active role. And yeah, so here I am now in 2025.
Yeah, I love that, and I do think that when you look at decentralized protocols, especially, you even look at like Bitcoin, Ethereum. Bitcoin had the Mt. Gox hack. Ethereum had the obvious chain flip, or sorry, chain split when
Yeah,
Ethereum Classic came out, and then THORChain had that ETH hack, and then now THORFi. And I think when you look at any really great decentralized system, which you could make arguments about all day long when it comes to Bitcoin, ETH, and others, but
yeah,
they all faced some major challenge, at least one, if not many. I mean, Bitcoin's had many moments. It wasn't just Mt. Gox. That was just kind of like the biggest one, I would say. But there were
yeah,
many moments for all these different protocols where everyone said, okay, this is dead. There's no coming back from this. And I think I remember the time of the ETH hacks, and people said, the entire value proposition of THORChain is, seamless decentralized swaps, and that your funds are safe and secured, and they're not, your funds are SAFU. So I know that really could have taken THORChain out, but the treasury and the way that it was handled by the community, especially, I think,
yeah,
kind of added to why THORChain still exists today, and actually thrived way more than it did, prior to that. And I think, how we kind of move out of THORFi and with TCY is going to be a lens at THORChain's future. I
definitely.
remember the moment that, yeah. And I actually kind of want to talk to you about, how did you feel when, RUNE, the way that THORFi kind of unraveled was, the admin key got used, things got frozen, then people started getting really concerned. I think RUNE's price was like somewhere around $3 to $3.50 at the time. The rest of the crypto market was crashing, and people were saying,
Yeah.
well, shit, RUNE could death spiral like Terra Luna. I remember, where I was and what I was thinking when I was watching the chart. Where were you, and what were you thinking when you were watching the chart?
Let me tell you, right? So I had been watching. I was concerned, right, because I'd spoke to you about dual liquidity positions, and I'd watched, end of December, early January, my Bitcoin RUNE liquidity position really, getting eaten into. And when I say getting eaten into, 70% down, right? That's a lot. And I remember then I said, no, like, I'm committed. I'm gonna leave it in. And then when the RUNE price plummeted, I'm like, okay, well, I'm down 98% now. So we're all or nothing. If the protocol implodes, then it does. And let me tell you, I was in all of those Discord spaces. I was in really active on the dev Discord, because yeah, I will say the protocol was fighting for its life at that point. And I I don't think many people appreciate how close to that knife edge it was, right? If you look at what was happening on chain, you had so there's a limit on THORChain where only a third of the nodes are allowed to leave at any one time. A third had requested to leave. There were more people lining up. The nodes had sort of, as they were churning out, they were unbonding. There was massive sell pressure. I mean, to say things were close, I think they were very close. And I will also say part of what I think is so incredible about THORChain is during all of that chaos, because yeah, it was an intense time, swaps were still being executed, right? That is, I think, a testament to, in some ways, on a base level, how well the protocol was designed. The fact that Rune price was tanking, there was all of this pressure, nodes were churning out, swaps were still being executed, and I think it's because of that really solid, use case that the protocol survived. When we finally soothed the panic and people stopped just pulling out, that allowed the price to start stabilizing. Alex put forward his proposal, community got behind it. And since then, I mean, we dipped below $1, like just wicked, but it's held that line. And I'm really, really looking forward to the recovery. But yeah,
Yeah,
I was
yeah,
I was in all of those conversations, and it was a tense few weeks.
yeah, yeah. It was, and my experience of it was that day where it kind of started to unravel. I was, I think it was like 8 p.m. local time for me, and I
Yeah.
was, driving back to my house, and I saw the Rune price, go down to like $2.50, and I was like, what is happening? And then, I think by the time I got home, it was like $1.50. Like everything had crashed. I was like, holy shit! Like, is THORChain going to be here tomorrow? And similar to you, I've got a lot invested in THORChain and Rune and the various pools on there. I only had a small position in the lending of THORFi.
Mm.
And yeah, I just and then I've obviously been building Leo decks, so I've been developing on it, I've been investing in it, and I'm like, holy shit, this might not be here tomorrow.
Yeah.
And that was, I would say one of the first times I got really scared about my Rune position. I think even during the ETH hack, I was like, oh, this is not good, but I think it was pretty obvious that it was going to still recover, and it
Yeah.
would just take some time, but we would get back. This was the first time for me where I was like, this, THORChain might not be here tomorrow, and all my Rune might be worthless.
Yeah.
And that is a harsh reality, to face. How have you felt now about Rune and THORChain? Kind of over the last, what has it been, maybe like 8 weeks or so, where I think we kind of exited the narrative of like, okay, THORChain is very likely not going to fail, so we know it's going to be here tomorrow. And now, what is the path to recovery? How is your kind of feelings about THORChain and Rune, evolved over that time, and what are you feeling right now?
Yeah. I mean, so I think a lesson I've learned in crypto, whenever you think it can't get worse, it can, right? And I mean, just funny enough, speaking about the ETH hack, I remember I was, I had again, I had drunk the Kool-Aid at that time, and I had just put a leverage long on Rune, and I remember I went to bed, and then at 2, like my phone gets off, getting a margin call. That was when the ETH hack happened, and that Rune price was just kept plummeting. Man, you know, that was honestly that was the most stress I've ever been in crypto, and I think I've kind of learned from that, and since then I've learned to look at it crypto a bit more dispassionately. So yeah, it was definitely a stressful time, but in terms of the recovery and where we've got to now, I I'm honestly I'm so hopeful, and I will say partly is because, like I said, the fundamentals and the use case of THORChain make a lot of sense to me, but there are a lot of really passionate and really brilliant people that are working on this project as well, right? I mean, like you said, you had Alex on, last week. I've spoken to him before. Really, really nice guy, really smart. I mean, they forked THORChain and are running Maya and have made some really interesting improvements there. Certainly, they pioneered what TCY is with their Maya token. So yeah, I mean, I'm so bullish on this protocol. It's yeah, I am. I'm all in, right? So um I can't I can't sell it enough. And I will say I don't take that lightly, because you were talking about how you felt about your ruin position collapsing. I'm as I was saying to you a little bit before, I'm an evangelist. I like to teach people about THORChain, what I'm involved in, and I have taught a lot of people who are not crypto natives about THORChain, and I've onboarded them. I say, download this wallet. I'll send you some ruin. You do some experimentation, and one or two of them have put some of their own money in, and that to me was the hardest thing to swallow, right? Having to go to those people and say, hey, look, I know I spoke to you about this is a situation, let me talk you through this. That to me was the hardest thing that I had to do across this collapse. But I'm so glad we are coming out the other side. I think we're not out of the woods yet, but there is so much bullish work that is being done. I mean, the amount of functionality that's being developed now is insane. And the one thing is, we just need to step carefully. The path we're on is going to get us there. So just make sure that we take the steps carefully. When TCY launches, let's make sure we land that release well. When the next chain XRP goes live, let's make sure we land that well. Next will be Solana. Let's just make sure, like, no need to rush. Let's make sure we land those well, and I'm sure we'll succeed.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I like that take. And you know, what are you outlined some of the development things that are kind of on the horizon? Like we got TCY, we've got Ripple, we've got Solana. There's also been a
Yeah,
few kind of like non-sexy changes that have happened recently.
yeah,
Like lowering the Bitcoin confirmation,
yeah,
and then the minimum basis points. So
yeah,
there's been what I think a lot of really positive changes in terms of like the collective ecosystem and the team, Nine Realms coming together and saying, what can we do, both in terms of like longer term, say harder targets to achieve, like adding, Ripple and other things and Solana, and then also some like immediate, things that we can do, like some of those other changes I mentioned. What are some
yeah.
of the kind of real time KPIs that you're tracking and measuring and looking at in terms of tracking like THORChain's health and kind of future growth? I know a lot of people will look at like trading volume. They'll look at, how many nodes there are in the network, how much Rune is bonded. What are some of, if you had to pick maybe three of your top KPIs that you're looking at on a regular basis?
Sure. I mean, look, I'll probably try to pick a few that are a bit more unusual. I mean, obviously, we all watch things like volume and ruin price and stuff like that. I think one that I would say is the um, the ratio of ruin that is in the ecosystem versus not, right? So bonded versus on exchanges versus just held in wallets. And a few weeks ago, I shared a graph about the fact that I think it's about almost half of all ruin is just sitting in wallets, right? Some are changes and stuff, but there's so much room that is just sitting in people's wallets. It's not being used in the network, and that to me is the biggest area for improvement of the protocol, and that's something that I'm passionate, because I think I can make an impact, right? So if anyone here is listening, if you have ruin, if it's on an exchange, take it off an exchange. That's the first step, right? That lessens the exchange's ability to allow other people to short it, which improves your investment. Next step, if you have ruin, consider bonding it. Consider being a liquidity provider. What I tell people is ruin is a utility token, right? It's not meant to just be held. If you are just holding ruin, obviously, I think ruin's a great investment, but you are missing two-thirds of the magic if you're not using it to earn yield. And that's why I think something like TCY is going to be great, right? It's going to give people who are maybe not as used to engaging with crypto the opportunity to own something that they can just hold, rather than having to put it in the network. So yeah, definitely the ratio of circulating to bonded rune definitely is one for me. And I think another one for me is the number of wallets that are integrated, right? So I think that is still an obvious one. It is one that I think probably hasn't gotten as much attention in the sort of recent past. Understandably, we've had bigger fish to fry. I know SwapKit and those guys are working really hard to support further integrations. But when we talk about volume coming to THORChain, getting more users onto platforms that are already existing, that those will be incremental increases in volume. Getting a new interface integrated, that's like a step change in terms of volume, depending on who you're on board. And with all the really interesting apps, so there's an app that's sort of been going around called Mocha, that are they're looking to onboard sort of more non-crypto native people onto the into the crypto space. um, you know, any sort of DEX and things like that we can get to aggregate using our liquidity. All of those things. That's why I think we're also going to see a lot of value. And eventually, there's been that sort of narrative on X, and I think it's quite a fair one. Is people should be using THORChain without knowing that they're using THORChain, right? It's because we're getting there, and I think that's going to be where we see our success, when we just become the backbone of cross-chain liquidity.
Yeah, I fully agree with that, and I think a big thing for me has always been THORChain being kind of like the Bitcoin of cross-chain trading, where it's just like it's bulletproof, it's decentralized, it's reliable, it's relatively cheap. It doesn't have to be the cheapest, but it has to have kind of that mix of other qualities where, especially people who trade, like a lot of people try to use a lens of someone who trades $1,000 to someone who trades $1 million. Someone who trades $1 million is a lot more sensitive to security than trying to eke out every little basis point. So that that's
100%.
kind of like, yeah, and it's just kind of one example of how there's a lot of different people in the space, and you kind of need, I think you need a myriad of solutions that can handle the different qualities that people are looking for. One thing you mentioned was TCY and getting people into the space. One thing that I think a lot of people are wondering, and I've seen a lot of questions on X about, does the introduction of TCY change the value prop of RUNE? Does it change, the reason why someone may buy RUNE? And I know, like, a normie or someone else coming into THORChain, they just look at it and they're like, oh, well, there's one thing you buy. It's if you want exposure to THORChain, you buy RUNE. And then there's maybe some things you can do with it in the network if you get that far. The introduction of TCY, I think, is a little concerning to some people, where they think, well, now there's a whole other thing to buy. And I'll give you my take, and then I want to hear what you think. Is, I think TCY can be like a gateway drug, where someone may buy some TCY and then they're going to start earning RUNE, and then I think it just gets them a little bit deeper into the ecosystem, and can be a net positive. But what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, look, I certainly agree. I think the fact that TCY is not going to be on exchanges, whereas RUNE obviously is, I'm talking about centralized exchanges. I think that's an interesting one there, right? Because I think a lot of people who are taking their first steps into crypto, um, they they start out buying coins on an exchange, and then they get more involved in sort of more decentralized spaces from there. So I think I don't necessarily think it will stop people from buying RUNE first, because it's RUNE's going to be the easiest way to trade for TCY. In terms of what people it is to buy and hold, and even people who are a bit more crypto native, would it change their value proposition of TCY versus of holding or using RUNE? My question would almost be, what is your what is your aim, right? What is your thesis? I personally, I still am a very bullish holder of Rune, right? Like I said, for me, it's a utility token, and as long as you're using it, I definitely see the value in holding Rune. If you just want an asset to buy and hold just because you think the protocol is going to do well, then I'd certainly think that TCY would be one that is better to just hold in your wallet. And the reason being is that Rune's Rune's price is going to be is obviously determined by people buying it, but people often buy it to then use it on the network, right? And that's where you'll earn your yield and things like that. And that's where the value of having Rune is. Whereas if you're not someone who wants to use something on the protocol, buying TCY is going to be a safer bet, because my view is that people will value TCY more on the volume that's going through THORChain, and the future revenue that people believe that it will have, and so that price of TCY will increase more as the network is used without you having to direct it. So yeah, I think that might be the use case of people owning TCY. But another thing to consider is, I think people who are switched on are going to trade TCY, not on dollar terms. They're going to trade it based on, the price in Rune, right? Because if TCY is at a 30%, 40% market cap of Rune, it's incredibly overvalued. Sell that, buy some Rune, put it in the network, and you're going to be, in a good position when the volume comes through. Obviously, if you believe in the network, or if it's trading at 4-5% of the market cap of Rune, obviously undervalued, right? It's worth 10% of the revenue. It's a good buy then. So my personal take is, yeah, look at the ratio between TCY and Rune, and that's kind of the way that I would trade that asset.
Yeah, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but a lot of people are wondering, what will the TCY price do at launch? It's launching at 10 cents, and that obviously sets the initial TCY Rune ratio. You can kind of take this in whichever direction you want, because not everybody likes to give price predictions. But what are you planning to do at launch? What do you think is going to happen to TCY, both from kind of a price standpoint and just a general usage standpoint? Say on May 5th on the launch day.
Sure. I personally would love to buy TCY at 10 cents. I suspect there's going to be a lot of people who are more clued up than I am, who are programming some very nice bots to get in there quick. I'm sure you've watched what token listings often do, when they go live on exchanges, and my suspicion is we'll get something relatively similar on TCY. I think we'll go from 10 cents, spike up to 30 to 40 cents, and then I think it'll settle back down to around 20 cents, and then from there, obviously, we'll see. I do think TCY will steadily start increasing in value, especially related with all the changes that we're coming with Rujira and things like that. I do think we'll see increase in volume there, and again, the market, as they start to understand what that asset is, I think they'll react quicker and quicker to any metrics that are showing themselves on THORChain, and that will be reflected in the TCY price.
Yeah, I generally agree with that, and I feel like it's been a little while since all the crazy token launches of like DeFi Summer, for example. But back then there were all the sniping bots, and people were going nuts. I remember I was getting involved in groups that were doing all sorts of things with sniping bots, and it was just it was a crazy time. And excuse me, I think THORChain has a really interesting ecosystem of people who are extremely smart, probably some of the smartest people in the entire industry. So I would imagine there's going to be some very sophisticated bots, not only sniping the launch, but also like playing these ratios. I obviously I've seen some of the X posts from like JP and others who talk about wanting to sell TCY at a certain ratio and buy it back at a certain ratio. And I think that people are going to create some really interesting economic models around that. What are your thoughts on? I know you've mentioned Rujira a few times. What are your thoughts on TCY's place in Rujira? I know there's been talk of different forms of TCY, like having a non-rebasing token, etc.
Yeah. Look, I'm interested to see what people come out with, right? So I think TCY is a great token that the app layer can play with, because it's again removed a bit from its place in the network security, which makes me feel a lot more comfortable, right? There was sort of talk about using RUNE on the app layer as for things like collateral, which there was a large reaction to, and I think that took a few of the Kujirans by surprise initially, and I'm glad we've kind of sorted all of that out now, and yeah, I'm again, I think I'm excited because I think I'll be a bit more like I was when I first got into crypto, right? It's a new space for me. I'll try a little bit of everything. I'll dabble and stuff, and yeah, again, for me, it's not only out of curiosity for myself. Part of it now that I'm more involved in the protocol is sort of market research. If I use it and I have a problem, I'll say, hey guys, you know, I'm 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 on the team. There seems to be some friction here. How do we solve this? So yeah, it's an exciting time.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's just generally a really positive thing for THORChain. Like, again, like the main metric we're all looking at, especially now with TCY, and all TCY holders are going to be tracking this, is how do we increase the regular trading volume of THORChain? And it's like, if that trading volume increases over time, whether you're a TCY holder, whether you're a node operator or a bond provider, or you're using Rujira for any level of activities, just the simple growth of volume is helping all of us. And I think that's what most of us should focus on. And again, like, there's been a lot of non-sexy and sexy changes lately that have kind of contributed towards that mission of how do we just increase efficiency and get more swaps. What do you think are some maybe major future ideas around how THORChain can grow swap volume? Like, if you had, just say, your dream scenario of, like, you can have any feature or integration that you want, what is going to bring the most volume to THORChain?
Okay, I'll answer that question. But when you talk about, you were talking about increasing volume and things. I'll tell you, one of the changes in the recent past that's made me a lot happier is, I think THORChain is paying attention more to marketing and narrative. And that's one thing that I was very frustrated about it in the past, because their stance seemed to be, we have amazing tech, we just need to keep delivering this amazing tech, and everyone will see the light, and everyone will come running, and we'll be great. And I think we sold ourselves a little bit short there, in the sense of marketing definitely has a place. And there's people like Kenton and Patriot Sounds who've done a really big push to increase the bond on the work. But even the official THORChain account, right, they've become more active, they've become more engaged, helping people see the network a lot more and manage the narrative. That, to me, is a hugely bullish sign, right? And you're talking about sort of non-sexy changes. That, to me, isn't sort of like an earth-shattering new feature, but I think in the long run that is critical. If you talk to me about a technical feature that I think will just make THORChain, lift off, it's going to be an off ramp, right? So I think there's that is the one place where THORChain always has to go to centralized exchanges, right? So if for viewers that aren't aware, I mean, one of the fundamental participants in the THORChain ecosystem are arbitragers, right? So, talking about programming bots, that these people do it to keep the network going. And so if we always have to engage with centralized exchanges like that to, create these exchanges of value, balance out our network, that is we spread that. Obviously arbs will spread that across a bunch of different exchanges and things like that, but people who themselves are starting to join crypto, they always have to go through an exchange, through a centralized exchange, then onto THORChain, Maya, and any DEX or cross-chain liquidity. If we as THORChain or RUJI on the app layer can have integrated on and off ramps, that to me is going to cause volume to skyrocket, because it's not only for me. I think there's volume in two senses, right? Integrating something like Ledger, right, will bring a whole bunch of a few really big swaps through and increase volume on the network. But when you're able to have on and off ramps, you increase mind share, right? Average people who sure aren't going to be putting $10 million through THORChain, but average people are going to be use it, and it becomes more embedded in the ecosystem and in the space. And that to me, I think will take us very far.
Yeah, I agree. I think having the right mixture of those non-sexy and sexy changes is something that I'm definitely looking for, and I think THORChain has really kind of woken up to that. I think there was definitely a heavy emphasis on doing like the big radical things, like THORFi being an example, with the aim of getting more volume. But at the end of the day, sometimes those little tweaks, even not even just in terms of code, but in terms of approach, like you mentioned with the THORChain handle and some of the community members kind of stepping up as well, has been definitely a big positive. You mentioned, and this will be my last one before we get into kind of rapid fire audience Q&A. I pulled up some questions that they've been asking while we've been live. You mentioned that landing TCY safely is a really important kind of key step for THORChain, for us to get out of this mess and move forward and get back on track, I would say. What are some of the key things you think need to happen for TCY to land safely? What are you looking for, whether it's from the team, from the community, or just in terms of TCY itself?
Sure. Look, in terms of the team, I will say I think they've gone into this all eyes open, and they've been really pulling out all the stops. They've done it was late because found the fix was implemented, the Thor security review had to be done again, and they wanted to make sure everything was airtight. Really happy with that approach. In terms of I don't know if you've seen, Alex did a post about the steps that need to be taken as part of the release. Basically, as part of this release, there's also a Bifrost refactor, which essentially just changes the way that THORChain observes transactions. So draining the entire swap queue, pause everything, release goes on, unpause transaction observation, really clear pathways. So I think on a technical standpoint, really happy with all of the things that we've seen from the team. My big concern is around users, right? And I literally today I just put a X post on saying, look, this is when you claim your TCY, if you were a lender or a saver, you send a transaction to THORChain from whatever Bitcoin or Ethereum address that you used, and you say, okay, send my TCY to this Thor address. Be careful which front end you use. Double check the transaction that you're signing on your wallet, on your hardware wallet, whatever it is, right? Those crypto fundamentals. Because I will say in the last few weeks, I've been getting, the amount of scammers that have been sort of contacting me, offering me this, links to that, all of this has skyrocketed. So yeah, please don't forget your crypto fundamentals. And the reason I'm going to be hammering this all the way up to May 5th, because I think a lot of the users that are that participated in, especially savers, were sort of less experienced crypto wise, and I really, really would hate to see any of them, get taken out by a scammer, which obviously THORChain can't do anything about, but it damages our image. And so I'm going to be, shouting as much as I can, hey, just be careful, be aware, and measure twice, cut once, kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, that's a very good piece of advice. I think and I've seen that as well. It's gotten crazy, and it always happens around any major airdrop of any kind. I mean, we've seen this with with all sorts of projects in the past where there's just been the airdrop gets announced or something like that, and then the airdrop's not even close to being ready yet, and then you've got all the scammers coming out saying, hey, click this link, do this, send me your private keys. And unfortunately there's a spectrum of crypto users that are a range of sophistication, and it's not necessarily their fault that they're they hear that there's an airdrop, they suddenly get the the notice like, hey, you got to do it in the next 2 hours, or you're going to lose your airdrop. And sadly, in crypto, everything moves so fast that it's easy to believe that, to say like, yeah, I only have 2 hours to do this. It makes sense. So yeah, definitely. I like the message of being safe and, measure twice, cut once. I think that's a good tagline for a lot of this stuff. Let's dive into some audience Q&A. I've pulled a bunch of good questions here. So first one is from Khan, and he asked, what are the biggest risks and opportunities for Rune in the next bull run?
In the next bull, well, it depends what you're saying about the next bull run. If you think that
are we in it?
Run,
we don't know.
We're
still don't know.
Ramping up end of this year. Yeah, I mean, like I said, in this year, I think we've got massively bullish things coming. So the opportunities this year, Apple Layer coming out, TCY coming out, many chains on the horizon, huge, really bullish catalysts, right? In terms of the next bull run in a few years time, I just think THORChain has demonstrated that it is pretty damn hard to kill, right? So definitely an opportunity there, and I think across the space, it's especially at $1 per rune, it's a really good buy in my view. In terms of the risks, my short term, I would say I would reiterate what I said before. We've got a lot of really great stuff coming out. Let's just make sure we execute it correctly. That for me is the biggest risk in the short term. In the long term, my view of the greatest risk is I think we need more decentralization, right? There's been so many conversations around this in the past, and I have to give huge kudos to RUNE. He's someone who literally is onboarding his competition on to node operation, right? He has been tireless in the efforts of increasing decentralization on the network. Now we're approaching the cap of 120 active nodes, and to move past that, we need to a change needs to be done in terms of the way that the network does consensus. So yeah, that for me is the biggest risk. It's not an issue now, but it's something that the team definitely needs to focus on in the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. What is your what does your portfolio look like in terms of your how your THORChain kind of exposure looks like? And this is I'm not asking any numbers, I'm not asking like anything like that, but like in terms of like, do you bond most of your rune? Do you liquidity provide, and with TCY coming out, like will some percentage be held as TCY? You can answer that however you want. I'm not trying to put you on the spot about it.
Fair call. I will say 98% of my crypto is in the network, right? Whether it's Rune, like a dual liquidity position, savers position, 98%. I did have a Bitcoin savers position that I was sad to lose. Obviously, I'll claim that as TCY, and I think that will do me for now. I'll trade TCY sort of along the lines of what I said, based on its ratio with Rune. But all my crypto is in the THORChain ecosystem. In terms of a split, I would say I'm probably about 60% Rune, 30% Bitcoin, a smattering of whatever else I'm experimenting with at the time.
Cool. Um, Taskmaster asks, what is the potential beyond swaps for DeFi, specifically on THORChain? What other financial services do you see being built? And obviously we've got RUJI and other things like that.
Sure. So yes, I mean swaps. There's a few different things to it. So you've got basically vanilla swaps, one asset for another. RUJI is going to bring a whole lot of things like derivatives and stuff like that, which basically has a slight lending component, but at its level, it's also to do with swaps, which is I think going to bring a lot of volume. Like I said, I think the main place is that we need DeFi we need normal people to be able to engage with DeFi, right? Mobile wallets have come a long way since I first started in the space, which is making things a lot easier. But until a normal person can easily use sort of crypto, I think we're still going to have like a DeFi versus CeFi. When a normal person can say, hey, I want to buy a pair of shoes, I will lock up some of my Bitcoin, take a loan out, buy the shoes, and then, pay it off that loan. Until we get sort of that kind of seamlessness, I think we're still going to have two spaces. And so products aimed at integrating normal users with crypto, I think is the place that I'd like to see DeFi go.
Cool. Yeah, I absolutely agree. I'm very heavily focused on user experience, so I definitely agree with that. Khan asks, is THORChain's infrastructure scalable enough to handle Binance level trading volume?
Yes. So yes, in terms of swap volume, certainly, right? So swap volumes at the moment are basically limited by how much people can arb. The more value that people put through, if they're willing to tolerate the slips, they can do it immediately. Otherwise, arbs love that. It's a profitable business for them. Definitely, it is. Streaming swaps were a game changer. There's another change that's coming in, which is essentially like an order book for arbs. So we can have slight kind of what Chainflip has with that on-demand liquidity. Definitely, we're equipped to handle the volume.
IJATS asks an interesting question. Out of the third of the THORChain nodes that left during the storm, have some percentage of them come back? There's a second part to that, but let's start with the first.
Yeah. So yes, I think so. It's difficult to tell, right? Because they don't say, "Hey, I'm Jack Smith and I have left THORChain and now I'm coming back," right? They are wallet addresses that send to exchange. They're new wallet addresses that have very little history, that have taken really big RUNE positions and delegated to nodes. It's difficult to see. I do suspect that quite a few people have come back. We definitely lost a few big whales, but a lot of people churned out, unbonded, held the RUNE, bonded back, and joined back in when they knew that it wasn't going to zero. But it was knife edge.
Yeah, it was a tough time. I was getting concerned for a second there. Do you think that TCY will attract a new set of investors to THORChain, or is it going to be some of the same people that have been around that are going to buy it? That's from Andersino.
I don't necessarily think it's going to onboard a whole bunch of really new people, right? Because if you don't know THORChain at all, why would you buy TCY? If you know THORChain and you believe in it, it's likely you would have some exposure to RUNE. So I don't think that someone will have never held RUNE and straight buy TCY. I could be wrong, but I think they'll be in a minority. I think a lot of the demand is going to come from people who already hold RUNE.
Cool. Yeah, I tend to agree, and I do think that there's potentially some people that are, maybe like users of THORChain but don't own any RUNE. Because they don't, necessarily want, like, they don't see the value proposition necessarily in owning RUNE unless they're going to be a bond provider or something like that. Yep. And they may just not want the, hassle of that.
Yeah, that's definitely fair. Yeah.
Sweet. Yeah, I think we covered pretty much every question. I'm just scrolling through the list right now. And do you have any, you mentioned we're on the hour anyways. Do you have any, closing thoughts? You mentioned your tagline about measure twice, cut once with the upcoming TCY launch. What else would you leave people with when it comes to, the TCY launch? We're about 5 days out, and just THORChain going forward.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's an exciting time, so I would definitely say get involved. Um, don't don't let fear hold you back too much, right? Sure, it can be a scary space. Crypto demands a lot of responsibility, but try things out. Worst case, set yourself up with a mobile wallet, put a little bit of Atom, Binance Smart, BNB, or something, a small gas asset, right? And then just experiment, right? Worst case scenario, you lose $20, but you can get an experience about what this is like to use, and just try it out. From there, then you can start to make big moves. But as long as you do good practice, I see so many people doing the really thing. You want to bond, you bond one rune. Okay, great, that was successful. Okay, the rest comes after. Just things like that. As long as you keep clean operations, you'll be fine. And definitely get involved. Don't let fear hold you back.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that message. It's an awesome space, and it's one where you can do small things like you mentioned,
Yeah,
and then you can learn. I mean, doing even like your first two transactions, like you're going to learn so much more than anybody who's just sitting on the sidelines, watching other people do
100%.
stuff. Cool.
100%.
Awesome. Well, thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it. It was awesome to talk with you and meet you after, obviously engaging with you a little bit on X and seeing you in the space. Yeah, thank you. And if anyone likes your takes, they should go and follow you on X at Slambammer. So thanks everybody for coming, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, appreciate it. Cheers.